Hi, this is Bob Akers with eStewards, and welcome to the Road to eStewards certification. We're hoping this is first in a number of webinars as we roll out the new eStewards certification. The point of today's program is to really talk about what it's like to get started. This is going back and aimed at people who may never have been certified to any standard and have definitely not been certified to the eSteward standard. So we're really looking at going to ground zero and bringing it from the bottom up. The agenda for today, the things we're going to try to cover, we'll start with things that you should know about the standard or getting ready. How do you start, which is usually where your hair falls out, understanding your operation, writing your EMS, and preparing for the audits. Before we really dive in, I just want to give you a brief history. I used to be a recycler. I started my operation from the ground up. We were not doing any recycling of electronics whatsoever. In our first year, we got up to maybe 385 tons and thought we were really doing well. At the end, I had a holding capacity of over 1,600 tons in my facility. I had a space to do my full triage, tear down, and refurbishing operations, as well as an area to do cells to get the refurbished material out. In that time, we also donated over 5,000 computers into the community to kids at risk, and we gave another roughly 200 computers to families of servicemen who were deployed in the Middle East so that they could stay in touch with their loved ones. So I'm fairly proud of that work. I'm not so proud of the way I went about getting my first certification under my belt. I made a lot of mistakes, and I'm going to try to share some of those with you and hopefully steer you away from those. Before we get really started, the things you should know, the eStewards is the owner of the eStewards standard. eStewards does not do the audits. There are 4 third-party CBs that perform the audits: NSF, Orion Registrars, Perry Johnson Registrars, and SAI Global. You can find their contact information on our website. We do not control the CB pricing or scheduling. They control their pricing, they own their schedules. And eSteward certification is open to small as well as large companies. So where do you start? This is always the big question. When I opened the eSteward standard the very first time, it was version 1. I'd already been a pledged eSteward, so I had a little bit of a taste of that type of an audit. But when I saw the full standard, I probably stopped breathing for a few seconds or minutes. We have 10 steps to certification, and again, these can be found on our website. They're fairly basic and straight to the point. Obviously, download the eSteward standard. Set up your ISO 14001 environmental management system. And this is important because the eSteward standard follows that same structure, basically. Get quotes from your eStewards accredited CBs. And again, this is an important step, and I would reach out to all of them. You may find a CB that has an auditor. I was lucky, I had an auditor in my own city, and it really, over, say 8 years, really sliced our cost of audits down. Sign a contract with your CB of choice. Fill out the revenue verification form with eStewards. Determine your annual license and marketing fee. And again, this is an online task that you can complete there. Fill out company information form for your website listing. So once you're certified, we can get you up on our website. And then you need to complete your stage 1 and 2 of the audits. It's kind of the meat of the subject, actually. Submit the signed license and marketing agreement and pay your annual fees. And if you have additional facilities within the same country, those need to be certified within 18 months. So the first step, download the standards and review them. I would, even though it says it's not required until July 1st, 2022, I would get the NAID standard and review that along with the other two standards. Although the real fear is that everybody will wait until June of 2022 to try to schedule their audits with NAID. Also be aware that NAID has their own auditing team, so you will schedule those directly with the NAID organization. Before you really get started and dive deep, I would review section 3 of the standard and become familiar with definitions, terminology. These are going to become part of your eStewards vocabulary. If you've been up and running for a while, you already have an organizational vocabulary. You're going to want to bring that in line with the eStewards vocabulary. It'll avoid confusion top to bottom in your organization. I would review section 5 just to understand leadership roles. You're going to want to set up a management team to help you accomplish certification. And this is where you don't do what I did, where I went all lone wolf, locked myself in a room and decided I was going to write this thing by myself in 2 weeks and then go around and looking for my ops director to proofread the thing and then find out all the mistakes we made. There's better ways to do that. Then review section 6 to really understand planning and the important points to address. One of those, and it's a trip up that you see happen with a lot of audits, are sections 6.4, 6.4.1 that deal with site closure. Site closure is something that if you're in business, you really don't want to give a lot of thought to, and you put it to the back of your mind. It's sort of like your succession planning. You've got kind of a rough idea, but you don't dive deep. If you don't have this figured out and covered, this will be something that will trip you up at an audit. So give that a review, give that some thought, and figure out how you're going to address that within your facility. And review section 8.8 on downstream accountability. This is another really important part. It's really the heart and soul of what we're trying to do. We want to know where this material goes. Luckily for me and my organization, I got out in front of this before I ever had heard of eStewards. I had traveled from Walford, Iowa to South Carolina and to Florida visiting what would eventually be members of my downstream at one point or another to ask the hard questions and to get the answers. I wanted to know where this material went. Before you really start to dig into certification and developing your eStewards program, you need to have an understanding of your operation. I know that sounds simplistic and basic, but a lot of us will walk through our facilities and look over and see somebody doing something and just say, don't do X, do Y. And then we walk away. Do we really have an understanding of what we just did, and do we have a record of it? Probably not. So the things to first look at, do you have a written business plan? Do you have a written operations manual? Do you have a written training manual or manuals? And do you have an employee manual? If you do, you're a little bit ahead of the game. You can use those to your advantage. The point is, the more you know about how your business functions, the smoother your road to certification will be. And you might want to pull those out and readdress them and make some updates to them. If you have none of those, you can take a look at your operations and you can create an outline, almost a checklist, and get a better feel for what your operation looks like in detail. So if we're going to look at your operations, kind of an exercise that I did probably by the time I did my 3rd certification was to really give an operational overview of the way material flows through my facility. And this is really section 8 of the standard. What I would do and what I did do was I just went to my dock and follow an inbound shipment through the receiving process. Some of the questions you might have, and again, keep in mind that this industry has changed a lot over the last 20 years. There are different models out there, and we're trying to address everything from a pure ITAD model to a pure end-of-life model, and really leave some room in there for the hybrids that are in the middle that do some end-of-life processing, but they're really preparing stuff to go to an end-of-life processor while they're harvesting material that can go into a reuse program. So one of the first ones is, and it's going to be very basic, but does all the paperwork match? Are all the materials on your manifest on board the vehicle that brought them to you, and are they noted? How are you recording that material as it enters your facility? Do you know where every item came from, by customer, by location? Do you require customer signatures, and do you have them? And if not, why not? Do you triage the inbound material? So if you're ITAD or if you're a hybrid, of course, you're going to triage to see what's reuse and what's end of life. And then importantly, what steps are taken to protect customer data? If the machine is moving on into a refurbished reuse program, how do you track that? This is really, if you're just a basic retail shop, you're talking inventory control, but you want to know how that machine's being tracked, and you want to have the ability, if your client calls you and says, where's my machine? That one shouldn't have gone. My hard drive's on there. I have data on there. You want to be able to find that for your client. How are the machines tested for reuse? What's your protocol? Do you have that written down? Do you have an understanding of that? What information do you provide to customers buying refurbished equipment? Do you tell them what tests you performed on the machine? Do you tell them specs about the machine? Just precisely what are you telling them? And then how do you track your end-of-life material from that triage area to disassembly? And it's the same for material that failed when you're trying to do a reuse or refurbish. How do you track that into your end-of-life line? And then, how are you disassembling end-of-life material? Do you employ shredders, balers? Do you have other destructive machines that are there? And if so, how are your employees trained on those? And do you maintain training guides and a training schedule for your employees? As you move through, you'll understand that employee safety and employee safety is a big part of these steward standards. So you're going to want to know, is employee safety equipment required, and is it available? Are your employees using the available safety equipment? I put a lot of safety gear out and would walk through my facility and see it hanging on a hanger or on a desk, and have to ask, why aren't you wearing that? It's an important part. People get hurt, and one of the main points we want to stress is we don't want people getting hurt. What health and safety risks have you identified in your work area? Different work areas will have different safety risks and different concerns. If you have a fork truck that's moving through, obviously you have a different risk. If you have people who are pounding on things to break them apart as opposed to using tools, well, that's a different thing. That's a different risk. Do you have disaster plans in place? Do you have a fire plan? I'm pretty sensitive about fires because I had one. So I want to make sure that that's covered. Do you have a weather plan? My facility was in the Midwest, so we were really concerned about tornadoes, straight line winds, and I was about 3 blocks from a river, so I had a little concern about flood as well. And since we were in the Midwest, snow was always a problem that we'd have to have some concern about and have a plan. We didn't want slips or falls in the dock area. We didn't want slips or falls on a smaller ramp dock that we had. And then another one that a lot of people glance over is, do you have an employee or visitor accident injury plan? Employee injury plan, probably, but if you're open to having visitors in your area, somebody slips on a dock, if they're picking up some equipment, they slip, they fall, they do something. What's the plan? Do you have that understood? Do you have it in writing? Do you have people trained on how to deal with it? And the bottom line is, how are your employees trained? How often? And is there a written record of those plans? You want to have a written record, and you really want to have it set up to the point where if I just walked through your facility and asked a random employee a question about fire procedures, they'd be able to give me an answer. I had this happen I had a new employee that was working on a day of the audit. My auditor walked up to this guy and said, "So if you have a fire, what are you going to do? What's the plan?" And my employee looked and said, "Put it out," which really wasn't the answer. So when you're really looking at the outbound side of things, the first part of this was really talking about going through your facility and looking at some internal operations. That's only part of your business. Some of the stuff is going to leave and go downstream as end of life. How do you track that outbound material? Do you know how your downstream vendors are processing your material? And how are they dealing with their employees? And do they have safety procedures in place? Do you know your downstream vendors downstream? So you send stuff to a downstream vendor who might be an intermediary company. They're going to pool a lot of material together to boost their volumes, to increase the revenue, and send it on down to a refinery, hopefully a smelter. Do you know what they're doing? Do you have proof? Can you create a flow chart of your downstream? If not, this would be a good time to start doing that. You want to build that downstream, and you want to ask your downstream vendors questions like, so if vendor A for some reason closes, what are you doing? Where does it go? What are the options? Because they're all going to have options, and you want to be aware of those. While we're talking about downstream accountability, and in the Stewart standard, you'll see it called material balance accounting. Um, it's really important to understand how you track and record material movement from your customer's door to your door. How do you track material through your facility? How do you track material from your facility to your downstream? And how do you know the quantity of material being sent to your reuse programs? Remember what our goals are. We want to know where this gear is going. We want to make sure that it's protecting the environment. We want to make sure that we're not shipping it to just a broker who sells it off and it gets mishandled. So you want to take responsibility for this. And one of these ways you do this is tracking your material. One of the systems that we put in place, and it's probably pretty archaic by now, but we had small scanners, and when we did a pickup, part of our scheduling operation was to create a barcode for each customer and for each pickup. That barcode would go on a pallet. That pallet would be scanned. Each machine being put on that pallet would be scanned as well. So we would have in a database, we would have the master scan number, and underneath that we'd have all the machines listed. So we captured those machines when those came into our facility, and that pallet started to be broken down, get opened up, be triaged. Those machines could be scanned as they move through our facility, and we could track them all the way through. It's pretty simple, pretty primitive, but it worked for us. After you create a downstream chart, you want to do downstream due diligence. Desk audits and on-site audits are really needed to understand what these guys are up to. The general rule, on-site audits generally needed every 3 years for each IDP, and materials, that's a company where materials of concerns are transferred to. Again, go back and read section 3 so you get up on these terms. If it's an eSteward certified or a licensed and permitted end processor in an OECD country, then it's a little different. Again, check the section on transboundary movements, section 8.7, to verify if your planned international shipments are permitted. That's a very important part. One of the things that we've added, really from a lot of input and feedback from our OEM partners, for those of you who take part in EPR programs, you've probably had some head scratching moments. You may have had 1 or 2 really odd phone calls from people asking some pretty weird questions like, can I buy all the material that you shipped last year? and I'll give you 5 cents a pound for it. That's one that I heard within the last 6 months. We want to make sure that the right thing's being done with this material. We want to make sure that the OEMs that are putting funding money into these programs are getting what they paid for. So we're just going to ask a few simple questions from people who do take part in these programs. Can you prove you accept the approved material? Some of these programs will only accept material from consumers. Some will only accept computers. Some will not accept printers. And we've seen a lot of recyclers that just sort of pile it all together and give a round figure for material brought in without really paying any attention to that. Can you prove where the material came from? Again, consumer, was it business? Was it from a community collection? Where did it come from? And can you prove where the material goes? This was brought to my attention by one of our OEM partners who really said they want to know where it goes. Are you aware of all the regulations for the programs you take part in? These things really do shift from state to state. If you're doing work for a multiple number of states, you have multiple locations, you need to know what those regulations are in each of those states, and you really need to abide by those, and you need to prove it. So the eSteward standard is going to ask you for documentation demonstrating conformity with the program requirements. You know, your OEMs may make that request. That material should be available for the OEMs, for the auditors, and for your state governments upon request. So after you've done a walkthrough, after you've made a checklist or a bit of a survey of your operations, and you know your internal workings, and you have an idea of some external pressures and operations, you can really start looking at your EMS and how you're going to draft this thing. One of the things that we did, we adopted a say, do, prove attitude. And it's really dirt simple. We also had another one that was the KISS principle, which was basically keep it simple, stupid. We want to say what you're going to do, and we want to see that. Then you're going to do what you said you were going to do, and then you're going to prove that you did what you said. It almost sounds like you're back in elementary school with a teacher telling you to do the stuff. But if everybody in your organization really adopts that attitude, you keep things very clean in your operations from top to bottom. You want to look at your facility and really see how you stack up. Remember that your auditor is going to do a walkthrough really right after your introductory meeting. Some of the things that are going to be looked at, NAID will really go after facility security, so you might as well get a jump on that. NAID auditors show up, the first thing they do is walk around your building, seeing if there's a way that they can get in without you knowing. Easy things that are skipped or mistakes are made are the exits marked. Earlier we talked about emergency planning, fire, earthquake, anything you can think of. Are emergency exits well marked? And are they open? This is one that we sort of messed up on. This is my own experience. We had an exit, it was marked as an exit, and we had a giant roll-up overhead door next to it. It was July, it was probably about 95 degrees. So of course the roll-up door was open, and the pass-through door, or the usual exit door, had a stool. I think it was a stool that was in front of it. So to my auditor's thinking, my emergency exit was blocked, even though 2 feet away was a giant roll-up door that anybody could have run out of. The truth is I was in violation of what I had said I was going to do, which was to keep this roll-up door and this pass-through door as an emergency exit point. The pass-through door was not workable. I got busted. Other things to look at: if you have a fire suppression system, has it been reviewed? Has it been inspected? Is it up to date? The same thing with fire extinguishers. All of our facilities have fire extinguishers throughout the facility. Are they marked? Can you see them? Are they easily visible? And have each of these machines been inspected and charged and functional? The dates need to match. You know, some fire extinguishers actually get to end of life as well and need to be taken out of service. So make sure that that stuff is taken care of. Facility housekeeping is another one. You know, do you have any trips, anything that somebody could trip over, anything sticking out, anything that's hanging over that could be something someone could walk into, something that could fall? Are all of the lanes that you have open so that people can walk through those? Are your fork truck lanes marked? And do you have barriers put up to stop people from walking into a dangerous situation? Those are all things that you can look at as part of your walkthrough. Any other visible dangers? You know, sometimes when you're changing the way your facility is configured, you might be moving material around. You might stand a work table up on end. If you do, are those legs turned out where somebody could walk into them? We had that one pointed out to us as well. So just a little extra thought on those types of things can save a lot of time and a lot of grief when you're actually doing the audit. And it's something you really should consider when you're starting to write your very first manual. This is going to be part of your working documents. So pay attention to that stuff. Once you've got an idea of your business operations, you have a model, whether it's a outline or you have things in writing that are more in depth, take a look at it. And as it is operating today, now, compare it to the E-Steward standard. Are there issues in the standard that do not really relate to your business model? You'll find that because there are, you know, the standard is written so that it will address the large end-of-life processors that we have, but it's also written to address the needs of an ITAD, quite different business models. An ITAD probably is not going to have much in the way of destructive equipment at their facility. You know, they're wanting to get more of this material into the reuse lane than the end of life lane. A destructive processor is going to have a lot of shredders and things that break things, and there's going to be a lot of particulate pollution. There's going to be some hazards for workers with you know, parts flying off of a line. It's going to be a lot different. Take a look at those and make note of what relates to your business and what does not relate to your business model as it exists right now. And then how are you going to deal with those items in your EMS? The big question is always, if it's in the standard, do I have to do it? When I read version 1 of the E-Steward standard, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, I have to go buy a lot of equipment. And really my auditor was the person that really saved me on that. Just to relate a little more on that auditing story, you know, my auditor looked at it as an educational opportunity. And I think if you go into every audit as a possible educational opportunity, you'll find this to be a little bit more fun and a little bit more of an exercise that improves your business and your business operations. But the big point from my auditor was, if it doesn't apply, then it doesn't apply, but you address it. And the way you address it is you do make note of it in your manual and you write, it does not apply. And the big point of that is it doesn't apply at this time, but in the future, you may decide that your operation requires, you know, a shredder or a baler. You've left that space, so you have planned for that. You should have a clear picture of operations. You should have a clear picture of your daily functions. So this would be the time you would go back and read section 8 of the E-Steward standard and compare your operations to the E-Steward standard. You would find your gaps and you'll fix them. The document, you want to document your work. So if you find something that's wrong, you want to make notes on that. You want to have it documented, and you want to have that stated in your EMS so that you can see that you saw something. You can see that you took action to repair it or to fix it. And then you have a way going forward, because we know all businesses are going to evolve. So again, once you have a good operational outline or model, you can begin writing your EMS. The way you do this is really, you can go section by section and address everything, even if it's not part of your operation now, with the understanding that you don't really know what the future is going to bring, especially in this industry. We have seen commodities markets fluctuate wildly. We've seen the change in the way machines are made. Just a number of changes that have made several of us that were out in the world doing this work make anything from small adjustments to drastic adjustments in our operations, just to make sure we have the revenue coming in. Remember that an important part of e-Stewards and ISO certification, and really the philosophy, is planning for the future. Another really important point is constant improvement. So as you start working through writing your EMS, leave yourself room to think about how you're going to improve. Leave yourself room thinking about what may need to be added in the future. You don't know what you might need to add, but you should have that ability to add that to your EMS without having to tear the whole thing up and start over, which I did. Not fun. So as you build this thing and you're preparing for audit, some of the things you want to make sure that you have down. You don't want to mess these things up. Document control is one that I see a lot of e-Stewards get slipped up on. I slipped up on it a time or two in surveillance audits. This is back to the say it, do it, prove it. You want to be able to prove it. Document controls, having those documents in, that each of these things underneath here are going to relate to that. Employee training. So if you're like most of these operations, you're going to have employees who are forklift trained, say. So how are they trained? How often are they trained? Do you have a record of the training? Who did the training? And do you know which employees were trained? From a gut, you could probably stand up and say, yes, I do know all this. But if you don't have a roster showing that training, you didn't do it. When you're being audited, the auditor is coming to look to see what you can prove. They're not coming in to have you say, oh, yes, I did that. And then they write down a little check. Yes, you did it. Prove that you did it. I held a 20-minute staff meeting every Friday, and we would take one section of the e-Stewards, either the standard or maybe just an e-Stewards philosophy, and we would talk about it. And we would explain why we were doing things the way we were doing them. The employees would sign on a roster as they came into that. We would have a document at the header. We would list what we were going to talk about. We would have another one where we had a person taking minutes, so we knew what questions came up and we knew how we addressed those questions, and that became a permanent part of our records. That was a really great way to keep the entire team really up to date on what we were doing as e-Stewards, making e-Stewards a real backbone of our company philosophy. And it was a great way to have, when we hired new employees, it was sort of a good way to give that employee several mentors on the line. Legal documents, this was one that I really sort of shot myself in the foot over. Most of us have a business license, and we have maybe some permits that come due, once a year. When I first started this, I borrowed an EMS from the Air Force, which had some higher requirements than what we were looking at. So my legal requirements, I put down just what was in this book. I put down that we would check legal requirements and we would review legal documents monthly. Well, after about 3 months, my director of operations realized that was stupid, because our legal documents weren't going to require review monthly. And really, we weren't going to have anything in the way of legislation that was going to change every month. So we stopped doing that. And of course, that was a violation when I got audited. And of course, your e-stewards documents, this is another one that we hear a lot of. We'll get phone calls when somebody's about to have an audit, and they'll need a copy of their license agreement, or they'll need a copy of their revenue verification form, or they'll need something that they should have. They should have submitted it to us, and they should have kept a copy. Sometimes this is the point where we find out, yeah, they didn't submit it this year, and we need to go back to get them to submit it. These are simple little things that you can control. And here's a little hint. This is something that we did, and again, it's not earth-shaking. That's probably not a work of genius, but we created something called the e-stewards calendar. And we had this calendar in the operations room, and every day had something in there if it were required. You know, every month you'd look at this thing, and there'd be maybe a couple of 3 things that we needed to do that month that were requirements that we wanted to track and have in our EMS and have available for our auditor to look at. It sounds tedious at the outset, but you know, we had this thing figured out within a week, and we just kept it up there, and the director of operations was the one that was responsible to go in and check off that thing had been done. So we had all of that ready for the auditor when they came in. Preparing for audits, I just gave you a big tip on what that's all about, or what you might be doing. Read section 9 of the standard. Once you have your system in place, you're going to want to test it. One of the big questions we have is, how long should the system be up before we can be audited? Auditors will tell you 3 to 6 months of work, so your auditor has something to review. And you will need to complete an internal audit. So go back and look at your management system, see who you have set up in that system, and who you've designated as part of your management team. Somebody's going to be designated as your internal audit lead. So you will do an internal audit, and you will have those forms available for the auditor. You're going to correct all flaws you discover, and you will discover flaws. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. This is difficult. And if you go through and you don't find any flaws, or you don't find anything that needs to be fixed, you're either the Einstein of the certification world, or you're not looking hard enough. Document everything that you do. Any change to operations, any change in your downstream, anything that you do, document it. We'll open up for questions. I just wanted to give you a couple of other sort of insider views from somebody who did it the very first time. And again, you know, I'm really trying to address people who are just looking at this for the first time. You open up the e-steward standard and you look at this thing and you gasp and you try to figure out how this is going to work. I did this backwards. I looked at the e-steward standard and then started running around trying to manipulate my organization without really understanding what my organization was doing, really from the day-to-day operational level. If I had really looked at my day-to-day operations before I started trying to manipulate things, I would have had a lot less work to do, because most of my work would have been you know, documentation, how am I training, you know, there's some health and safety issues as far as workstations go, but it wouldn't have been as insane as what I made it out to be. It is hard work, but I think once you do it, I think the beauty of this, and the beauty of this for my organization, this really became our heart and soul. This was the thing that kept us moving forward. It was something that was handed off to my board as a business continuation document as well. I basically had the thought that if I had walked out and been hit by a bus, my organization would be fine. It would continue. And that was really the goal. Philosophically, things might have changed a little bit, but the organization could have gone on. In the beginning, I had the opportunity to pick my poison. What certification did I want? I picked the e-Steward certification simply because it was rigorous. I didn't see loopholes. I thought that it was the highest honor my organization could achieve if we could pass this thing. And that's really what I wanted. I wanted no loopholes. I wanted something difficult, and I wanted to be the best. And that's the reason that I chose the e-Steward standard. So now, if you have any questions about how to get started, please feel free to pop those up to Angelo. Also, this is going to be online. We have recorded this, so you can go back and review this. And really, I am available almost 24 hours a day. I look at my email all the time. I'm happy to share even my direct phone line with anybody who's going through this process and they're having difficulty. I want everybody who tries this, goes down this path, to be successful. And my commitment is to help everyone who's trying to become an e-Steward to make it, to be successful, and to not lose a lot of hair over this thing. This can be done. Thank you.
So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or send the question through the chat. And we'll take a few minutes here.
Hi, we've got a couple of questions. First, I want to say hello to some people that I know in Senegal that are viewing this or listening to this. We had a question about when 4.0 will be released. It was released yesterday. It's online. You can go download it for free. Oh, yeah. And I had a question about ISO 14001. Yeah, the ISO 14001 is still required. We still think it's the best environmental management system out there. Just a quick comment about ISO and about that certification. Any of our certifying bodies can help you with that. You may be able to do it at the same time you do your e-Stewards certification. They do really go hand in hand to a point. So take a look at it, see what makes sense for you. Sort of looks like all the hot questions have come in, so we'll start to wrap this thing up and let you get on with your day or your evening. If you have ideas of other topics along this line, again, this was really an attempt to talk to people who are just getting started, just starting to go down the road with us. So if you have some experience, this was probably like going back to grade school again. But if there are other topics you want us to address, we want to make this a regular thing and find a way to help e-stewards and help people who are going through the certification process beyond just the panicky phone calls that we get every once in a while. And I'd like to thank you for taking the time to spend with us. Again, feel free to reach out to me at any time. You can find my email online, and I really hope to see you all down the road. Thank you.